of graphics, which have roads and outdoors here for our purposes today. And we are talking about a ministry about mental health justice, advocacy, embrace, going into some dark, hard places. And I feel that, often we are entering a big unknown when we take this step. And these, I thought the mountains and the nature really kind of represents that. But as in this slide, there is light and hope and peace with every person and with every congregation who enters into this path with us. And all it takes is an earnest resolve and a pure heart as represented by this child. So this is Becoming Wise, the Journey. Next slide. Our agenda today, I'll have an introduction, history, a little bit of a history of Wise. I'm very happy, but also intimidated. Alan Johnson has joined us, so I feel like I should just turn this over to him, but he'll let me know how things go here. An overview of Wise to date, what we ask of our faith communities, and then our Q&A. Next slide. So I am so elated to be here today with you, sharing the joy I feel about this ministry and this movement. As I say, I am a psychologist. I've been one for about 35 years, and it is extremely meaningful work. Being a partner in the process of helping an individual or a couple or a family find their way through crippling mental health challenges and hopefully begin to thrive. But change in therapy happens in a very small world, often just the therapist and the individual. And it's very private, as it should be. And it often takes place without the wider active support of the person's community. Not always, but either people don't know that someone's involved in that, and it's up to the individual to share, or we often have active resistance to someone being in therapy. Family members can be a little bit worried that they're going to be blamed, and sometimes it actually works against, they not only don't have support in their community, they have resistance. So, and then of course, many people never go to therapy, but are trapped in the hell of a loneliness that they feel will never end, or a drug dependency, or they're living with a long-term chronic mental health diagnosis and wonder if they can ever be embraced and included in a world of, quote, normal people. In my own immediate family, we experienced a suicide in 2017. It was my daughter who had been abused at age 2 and came to us at age 4. We were a family for 18 years. There was a brokenness that she struggled mightily to overcome. Her brave attempt to find her way in a world that couldn't fathom what reality was like for her. That will always be the highest example of courage that I will ever witness. And I think my husband, her picture's up there on the mantle. I didn't know that. I just saw that behind me. I wonder what difference could have been made by a congregation that discussed the realities of mental health challenges as easily as they discuss the Christmas pageant coming up this year. If she could have grown up seeing people every week unafraid to be in their church community with their own demons and to be openly loved and included. At the very least, she would have been shoulder to shoulder with people who also sometimes wondered how to go on, and to be aware of all the ways that people do, and of the help and care that can surround the person in deep mental pain. I won't know that for Erica, but it has been life-saving for me to work with a dynamic national mental health board. I just get goosebumps every time I talk about this. and all the churches, synagogues, and campus ministries across the nation who are determined that they will speak out, reach out, actively minister, educate, and most of all, embrace anyone who may be in a similar situation. We do know of lives saved because of this outreach. There's nothing more important that you can be involved with, in my humble opinion. It's a beautiful thing to be involved with. I hope you will take this information back to your church or community and consider beginning your own WISE process. Next slide. Okay, I will just speak briefly about our amazing history. I thought this sentence summed it up. Out of tragedy, God spoke and people listened. Next slide. This will just be a quick overview, and there's so many wonderful details about our history I'll have to leave out. In preparation for this, I did speak to Alan Johnson, our board's chair emeritus, and he was our chair for many, many years, and many of you know him. And in our talk, I was amazed to learn of all the early interconnections of our mental health board with Pathways to Promise. The UCC has been participating with Pathways to Promise since 1987. We have greatly benefited from your many resources so generously shared. In fact, it was at a Pathways to Promise conference in 2009 that a group of about 15 to 17 UCC participants just got together in a room afterwards, trying to come up with a practical, personal approach. And practical is the key word here, to mental health needs. Not good intentions, not just talking, but trying to get boots on the ground. Out of this was born the Mental Illness Network, which later became the Mental Health Network. But everything begins with a personal story, and the story of WISE really began 2 years prior, in 2007, following a double suicide at Allen's Church in Boulder, Colorado. I believe it was one family, 2 children, a year apart. Because of this devastation and agony, people came together. They began to learn, expand their awareness, brought in, professionals, did a lot of soul searching, and formed a task force. In 2010, the church became A2A and joined forces with the UCC, becoming accessible to all. Eventually, after doing all this work and all of this growing, they knew it was time to form a covenant for the mental health team, the mental health network team they had. So Alan and others sat down and asked, how can we be more welcoming? That was key. And they already had the inclusive part, being A2A. So they had WI on the way here. And then Alan tells me that they had a marketing person on their team who came up with the rest of it. So she added supportive and engaged. So welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged. And it just seemed perfectly right. And this acronym has been our simple but beautiful guide for this ministry ever since. Next slide. This slide was already populated like this, and I thought it must be needing to be left in. It says the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And that, if that doesn't sum up what WISE is all about, and it was already here in the slide. So Walt Disney, thank you. Next slide. So here we are today. We have 42 faith communities, of which one is a Presbyterian church. And we have 3 synagogues. So we are really reaching out beyond our denomination, beyond Christian faith, beyond all these arbitrary borders, as it should be. We're impacting lives in all places, and people are really interested. We have 3 UCC conferences that are WISE, 2 associations, and a college campus ministry right now is right on the cusp. Next slide. So how did they get there? We hope and ask that everyone begins by going to our website right there, www.mhn-ucc.org. And you will begin by filling out a short survey. And there's a series of blue tabs across the top when you enter the website. One will say WISE certification. Click that. Under that tab, you will see how to begin the WISE process. And there's the survey. This survey notifies us that you are out there. It gets you in our database, and it saves you a lot of time and wasted energy. We've had people doing their own thing. Thank you. It's posted in the chat, it looks like. We've had people doing their own thing, and we take some responsibility for this. Before they ever contact National, they go through a lot of this process, and while that may be okay, we find it not always ends up being in alliance with our values and goals. And so sometimes there has to be some reworking. And so we really want you to come in to National to begin with. And we've made an effort now to make that very clear. I don't think you can even avoid it on the website. And we're spreading the word, and you please help us spread the word too. Check in with us. We want you working early. Once you fill out that survey, you will be assigned a liaison. Often that will be me. And I will follow you through to certification. We next ask that you form a committee. And really, beyond that, we don't have a lot of hard and fast rules. I have on there, I see live with ambiguity. We are the UCC, and as you might know, we allow each church to find its uniqueness, its own special voice, so that the sovereignty and creativity of that community is not squashed by something that a national board imposes upon it. And so that's how we also go about asking you to become WISE as well. There is many individual pathways as there are churches or faith communities. We just ask that you do, not just talk, that you go about this deeply and seriously, that you don't ask for a 1, 2, 3 step approach. Don't copy anyone. And that you enter into a deep discernment about what your WISE ministry will be based on the needs, resources, and characteristics of your people. So there can be a long period of figuring this out. And I am happy, and our board is happy to be there in the unknown with you. But it does surprise me that often I usually ask for a phone call once the survey has been completed, just to get to know you a little bit. And I'm surprised by, often people are saying, okay, what do I do? What do we do? Let's get going. The committee has told us we want this certificate, a couple of months. What do we need to do? And I really have to put on the brakes. I don't know your church. And so I can't tell you. Some churches there are people in the church that have a lot of resistance to talking about mental health issues. Other churches, that's not an issue whatsoever. If yours does have issues with that, that's a big factor in how you decide to proceed. Churches have open secrets, unwritten rules about, what can be said. And, sometimes it's threatening to suddenly get in there and start this kind of thing. How will you go about addressing all of this? And I can certainly talk to people about that, but That's just an example of how unique it is for every congregation. Okay, next slide. I often advise downloading a survey that I created for my church. And there it is. It's same row of tabs across the top. You go to the resources tab, leads to congregational toolkits. And in that toolkit, there's a lot of amazing resources. There's something on trauma, I think, on dementia. And down towards the bottom, there's something called an assessment of congregational mental health needs, introduction, and the survey. And this is given anonymously to members of your church. You give the introduction and the survey, and it asks things that no one ever talks about, like depression, anxiety, sleep disorders. And you find that people you have known for years and years, and you see every week. And again, this is anonymous. This will not work if anybody, this is meant for one or two people to look at in the leadership. But it's often amazing what people are dealing with that they're willing to share in this format that you would never have known about. And often this can help pinpoint where you need to start. You have a blueprint for what your congregation is facing right now in real time. And then you can develop support groups. Oh, before I get into that, you're welcome to change the survey any way you want. This just is what worked for us, that I developed, but you can add, subtract, do whatever you feel as you look at that. You then can develop support groups, bring in speakers, NAMI, mental health first aid, gather resources around your needs. In our church, what crystallized is we discovered that we had many young mothers whose husbands and extended family were off in Asia working. And here they are with infants trying to raise, and they're struggling with language, with jobs, with resources. And we knew that, but we didn't know the anxiety and we hadn't thought about what it was doing for them. So we really, were able to surround them by the fact that they just filled out this survey. And we brought in early childhood intervention. And we also found out the extent at that time of debilitating anxiety people were dealing with regarding the political situation at the time. And then you also include your outside community. What's going on around you? I'm so amazed at what every church does. It's just beautiful. I love this job to be able to see what everybody does. One church developed a pop-up clinic at the edge of an Indian reservation near their campus to help address the mental health struggles and the alcoholism and other issues of their neighbors. So ministering outside of your people, once you take care of your people, is part of WISE. So you start offering these things and you begin to flex your muscles. And as a group, you find that you are becoming mental health aware. You start to know who you are as a potential WISE congregation. Okay, next slide. Okay, at some point, after you've been living this WISE journey, you decide it's time for your covenant. And I wrote there that it's already in you. And I think it will be. It will already be in you. If you've been doing this work, what you want to say in your covenant becomes obvious. Your committee begins to distill the essence and truth behind what you're doing and how it's grounded in your faith, and then to put it into words. And I am amazed at how fully unique each one is, while also, of course, reflecting many of the same sacred principles that bind all of us together. Okay, let's go through what I wrote here. These are some things you want to think about including. Include your church's understanding of the suffering and mental health struggles and exclusion that people face with mental health challenges. Talk about the mandate you experience to act according to the dictates of your faith. What will you do? What have you been doing? When you submit your covenant to your liaison, we will be looking at whether you are caring for those in your congregation as well as the wider community. Whether you are welcoming those with mental health diagnoses into all aspects of your church life, including leadership. We ask that you continue a robust ministry after you receive your certification, and you check in yearly with us to let us know what you are doing. And though we don't have many rules, we did make one. There is a very harmful practice by some Christian leaders and believers called conversion therapy that attempts to change LGBTQIA plus youth and individuals to becoming straight. Doesn't work. It's ridiculous. It's harmful. It's cruel. And we did vote that your church cannot be a proponent of conversion therapy and receive our WISE certification. And I have totally lost track of how I'm doing on time. I do have a covenant to go over with you if there's time, or do we maybe that can be part of Q&A. How am I doing, Reverend Jermaine?
You're doing good. I think we can probably go another 5-10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I do have Kent UCC in Kent, Ohio is a church that was my first church to take through the WISE process solo. And so they did become WISE in January. And I thought I would just go through what they have here. They say they are entering into a WISE covenant, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, engaged. It's a holy and sacred promise to God, to each other, and to our community. It is grounded in the perfect love we know God holds for each of us. We are God's beloved children, and through a WISE covenant, we proclaim that we are beloved even when we are experiencing mental illness, addiction, or other brain disease. As our Sunday services regularly affirm, we do not come as a perfect people. We are people perfectly loved by God. And then they decided to make this was unique to me. They decided to have each member of this congregation say that I commit to recognizing that mental health is a part of all our lives. This is not an us versus them reality. Further, I recognize the role of our congregation is not to fix situations, but to make referrals and share resources when appropriate, to be present with those experiencing challenges, responding with compassion. I am called to proclaim that we are loved by our Almighty and our all vulnerable God, and accepted for exactly who we are, no exceptions. I do not believe that our identity is rooted in any diagnosis, addiction, or mental health challenge, but rather as the beloved children of God. I commit to extending radical belonging to all and accept each other just as we are, honoring our lived experiences. I commit to holding sacred and safe space and accompany one another and our families through experiences of the pain and despair of mental illness, addiction, and other disease. Creating a stigma-free, judgment-free, and shame-free environment. Choosing words that are life-giving and not stigmatizing labels. Affirming our humanity instead of creating more boundaries. Educating myself and our wider community to better understanding mental health, substance use disorders, neurodevelopmental differences, and other brain disease. To companion our children, youth, and elderly. Listen without judgment to their stories of mental disease, whether personal or within their families and among their friends. recognize particular needs in certain seasons of of our lives. This church had youth on their WISE committee, which I thought was amazing and wonderful. To recruit, nominate, and support persons in mental health and addiction recovery to serve on ministry teams and in leadership positions within the congregation. Being open to calling clergy and hiring staff in recovery from mental health, addiction, or brain disease challenges. I also commit to the mission of our congregation to maintain appropriate contact, support members who become incarcerated or hospitalized because of episodes of mental illness and behaviors due to addiction. Form strategic partnerships with mental health and addiction recovery agencies and professionals, the LGBTQIA community, racial justice organizations, social support agencies to join in advocacy for justice and treatment and support. To invite and encourage support and recovery organizations to use our building facilities. To maintain clear and healthy boundaries for the well-being of the congregation and the community. To hold ourselves true to this covenant by convening a team to review our WISE actions each January. This includes evaluating our areas of strength and identifying areas needing more resources. Proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ for all who are part of our community so that everyone knows they are loved and accepted by God just as they are. We, the Congregation of Kent United Church of Christ, pledge to uphold this covenant in our personal lives, as well as in the actions of our church family, and to prayerfully seek God's guidance in building a welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged community. They really walk the walk. They had people that were very courageous, that were living with a lot of mental health challenges, speak to the church, and they just got right out there and made it real. And so once this happens, your liaison knows everything you've been doing. It's very quick. Your certificate is granted. It's sent to you. We have a couple of other celebratory things. I won't ruin the surprise that happen, but we all have bells on as the entire mental health board celebrates another faith community becoming part of our ministry. And so I thank you for your interest, for your heart, for this critical, beautiful ministry, and thank you in advance for what I hope you're going to do with it. Thank you for having me.